Hi guys, Adrian here, the Porsche lover. For today, I'd like to share you some tips and guide on what to do if your car gets flooded. Let's deep dive subject for today. As usual, we'll start with a wristwatch check. So my wrist today is a quartz diver from Swatch. It might look a bit small on the wrist, but it's actually a 38mm watch. It looks small because due to this bezel size, which is thicker and the dial is very small. Alright, back to the topic at hand for today. First off, I'd like to wish you a very happy New Year 2022. Even though this topic isn't a very happy topic, nonetheless, I wish you a better year ahead for this year. So if you're new to the channel, welcome. So in this channel, I talk about love about Porsches, my passion for cars, technical matters, and also my passion for watches. So if you like this channel, please subscribe to it and give the content a like button. As most Malaysians would know, Malaysia actually experienced an unprecedented amount of rainfall over the past couple of weeks. This has actually led to severe flooding throughout the entire country. So I pray that the victims of these floods will actually have a better time ahead the next coming couple of weeks. The Met Department actually forecasted there'll be more rains and more flood coming on for the next couple of weeks. So I decided to make this video to actually educate and also give you guys an info on how to save your cars and to avoid further damage. So this video will be divided into 3 parts. So the first part will be, let's say if you're caught in the flood, what do you do? Let's say there's a few scenarios which I'll share you later. Number 2, I will share you also on what to do. Let's say if your car has already been flooded, what is the next step you should take? And third, the cost to repair the cars, which is also one of the most important questions that most people will ask. The first part I'll be sharing about will be on prevention and how to prevent flood from damaging your cars. So there's a few scenarios where this can happen. So scenario number 1 I will touch on will be, let's say for example if you're driving and let's say there's floods on the road, what do you do? So most people, they actually will follow the car in front of them. Let's say if they see the car in front of them can go through the flood, they'll follow as well. So this is actually a big no-no because different cars have different type of configurations. So let me give you an example. It's a true story. So one of my friend and so a client of mine actually went through a flood. So he saw a small car in front, which is a Myvi. He was driving a Toyota Alphard. So I thought if the Myvi can do it, why not the Alphard? So the Alphard also went through, but halfway through the flood, the car actually stalled and then the engine died off, which actually turned out to be engine damage in the end of the day. You must be wondering why this happened to the Toyota Alphard instead of the Myvi, because the Alphard is a much taller car, it's an MPV compared to the smaller hatchback Myvi. So let me share with you what happened to this car exactly. So as the Alphard was passing, there was another oncoming car from the opposite direction. So that car, when it passes through, we actually create a wave in the water because the water level was quite high. So the water level was high enough to reach the air intake of the Alphard. That Alphard sucked it in to the engine and that damaged the engine. Just to deep dive a bit further, so what will happen when water is sucked into the engine? We get something called hydrolock. So hydrolock is what happens when the pistons of the engine try to compress the water. So of course, water can be compressed to a certain extent, but once it is compressed already, it's no longer compressible, it will become like a hard wall. So imagine your pistons actually hit the hard wall and it gets bent. So there goes your engine in a very expensive repair. This does not mean that the Myvi is a better car overall, because it could also happen to the Myvi. So what are the factors that affect this is that it depends on the car itself and also the situation on the environment around the car during the floods itself. So you say for a car itself, it will depend on the air intake location. We talk about how high is the exhaust, the coverings at the bottom. So all this will affect the car being able to go through a flood and the water being stuck in. Another factor to consider is also how fast the flood water is actually flowing. Let's say if the flood water is at least 6 inches high and is flowing fast, it will actually float the car up. So you have to be very careful on that because it's very dangerous. You thought that you can go through, but your car will actually be carried away. So my advice is that let's say if you see floods which is not comfortable for you to go through, please park the car one side, turn on the hazard light and wait till the waters recede before you do anything else. Next up, we'll go to scenario number 2 where let's say if you actually park your car one side, turn the hazard light and suddenly the flood waters actually come up, or you're stuck in a jam and the flash flood happens. What do you do? Always save yourself, please. And then your life matters the most. I mean, the car can be damaged and everything, but there's only one life and you can't reset it. In the event this happens, what you should do immediately is to actually unbuckle your seatbelts, put the windows down and turn off the car engine. Because let's say if the flood waters go to a high enough level, we actually short your electronics and you can't use the power window to escape later. At the same time as well, if let's say you try to open the door, the water pressure will actually push against the door and you can't open the door. Hence you're stuck in the car itself and in the flood, which is very dangerous. one special tool which I highly recommend to get in case of emergency. It's called the seatbelt breaker cum window breaker. So as the name implies, let's say if your seatbelt is actually jammed already, your buckle can't be open, you can use it to cut the seatbelts, and the other side usually is a 2-in-1. You can use it to smash the windows to get out, just in case the power window doesn't work. So what I'll do is that I'll actually leave a link of when you can get it down below. At the same time, I also did a video where 5 items you should have in your car just in case of emergency, which I'll link it up above here. So end of the day, please save yourself when an emergency such as a flood happens. The third scenario which could possibly happen and has happened to many cars is the cars actually parked at home in the driveway. So you will see the water actually rising, the flood is actually rising up. So they have no time to actually reverse the car because there are flood outside, so the car can't be driven. So what do you do then? So what I recommend is actually to remove the battery if possible, because I know some batteries are easy. You pop open the hood, the battery is there. However, some continental cars or luxury cars, they actually have the battery under the seat. So that one you can't do much about it. So another thing which you could do, which I saw online, which is pretty useful, is actually to buy an oversized plastic bag. So you actually can wrap the bag so that it can be as watertight as possible, so that the water can't go in and destroy the electronics. So the same thing as the battery itself. So they are taking out the battery terminal because, and then you don't want any current supply to the car itself where the electronics running and it will short or burn the control units in the car itself. Moving on to the next part, damage control. So let's say if indeed, touch wood, the flood has happened, it has actually submerged your car, be it for 1 hour, overnight, or a couple of days. What do you do next? So the first thing I always recommend is that please do not start the car. Starting the car will actually do more harm than good. Let's say if you do start the car, you do not know that whether there's water in the engine itself. If you start with water engine, what I explained earlier, hydrolock will happen. And when that happens, the engine is basically gone already, and that will result in very expensive repairs. Another reason why not to start the car is because there are many control units in the car itself. You're talking about at least 5 to 6 for a basic car, up to 80 to 100 plus control units in the luxury cars. So when you do that, you will actually fry or short circuit all of them. Is a possibility. So please do not start the car when the car is flooded. Yes, I know there are a lot of tutorials online to teach you on how to check flood damaged cars and everything, like for example taking out the engine oil dipstick to check for water content inside. But as you know, some cars don't have an oil dipstick, so you can't check that. You need to actually drain the oil out, and there are a lot of things that could happen. So let's say if you don't check properly, you start the car, damage will happen. So unless you're technically well versed, I would highly recommend that you leave it to the professionals. So what I recommend in this situation to do is that to actually not to start the car like I said earlier, and to actually call your insurance for free towing to the workshop. But before you do that, you actually need to call your workshop first, because there's a report saying that there are up to 50,000 cars which are flood damaged. So your current workshop might be filled to the brim with cars which are flood damaged, and they might not be able to accept your car. Lastly, we come to the most important and the most popular question I get, that how much does it cost to repair a flooded car? So this is actually a complicated question. There's no easy way to answer this, because it can reach anything from 5,000 ringgit to 100,000 ringgit or even more. The sky's the limit, depending on how severe the flood has damaged the car itself. Doing some quick maths, like I mentioned earlier, in the car, let's say if there's 100 control units and you're so unlucky, all 100 control units fail. So let's say assuming 2,000 ringgit per control unit, which is actually cheap, some can go up to 8,000, you're looking at about 200,000 just to replace the control units for the car itself. So, and the cost factor, sky is the limit. One of the most basic items you can do for a flooded car is actually to replace all the fluids in the engine, because water could have entered the engine, water could have entered the braking system, and this could damage the system itself. So the basic major service could be done the car is actually to replace all the fluids. You're talking about the engine oil, the gearbox oil, the brake fluid. So, and they will flush out all these items and replace it with fresh fluids. That is assuming that the car can still be started and is operational. Next up, I'd like to talk about the high cost items for flood repair cars. So one of the highest cost items you can get in a single item will be the engine itself. As I mentioned earlier, if you have actually driven the car through floods or water has been sucking through the air intake, it will immediately damage the engine because its hydrolock has happened. So the only solution for this is to either replace the engine or to overhaul the engine. So you talk about replacement of engine, you have two options. You have to replace it with a brand new engine or a second-hand engine. So the most cost-effective way in my experience is actually to replace it with a used engine or second-hand engine. Another high-value item for flood damaged cars will be the control units, like I explained earlier. So it could be ranging from 1 up to 100, again depending on the car models and everything. So the car repair cost can get very high with these control units being damaged. So some people ask, can these control units be repaired? I would say that most likely no, or very low chance of being repaired. I give you an example. Let's say if you have a handphone, you submerge it in water, which is not water resistant, don't have an IP rating for a couple of hours or overnight or a couple of days. When you take it out, even though you dry it, the chances of the handphone working is very low. So the same applies for the car as well. So once the control unit has been submerged in water, it's supposed to be short-circuited. Another issue that is related to the control units and the electricals will be the wiring for the car itself. So you can imagine these cars are actually submerged in water. So when it's submerged, these wires will start to oxidize. So in the modern car, the length of the wire can be more than 1 kilometer long. Yes, you heard me right, 1 kilometer long. So you can imagine the tons of wire in the car. So let's say if you clean up the car, everything's looking fine. That does not guarantee that the car will be okay 3 months or 6 months down the road or even a year, because electrical gamblings might appear here and then. And the worst case scenario is that it's intermittent, meaning that it will appear today or tomorrow is alright. So these are very headache things to solve. That's why most people don't recommend for you to buy flood damaged cars. Another item to repair on the flood damaged car will be the interior of the car. Depending on how severe the flood was, and then you could even see flood water still being retained in the car itself, in the footwells. So in order to clean it up, you need to suck out the water, you need to remove the carpets, the seats, wirings, depending on how the car is, all the coverings, the interior finishing and everything, to get to the water, to clean it up, then put everything back again after you sun the car already. Let's say if you don't do it properly, it could actually cause some health issues where, let's say this is wet and it will cause mold to appear. Then that, if you have a very sensitive skin or allergic, or if you have sinus, it will cause you to have an allergic reaction to it. Speaking of allergic reaction, another overlooked component for flood damaged cars will be the aircon system itself. Why? Because like I mentioned earlier, the carpet can retain the water, you clean up ready. However, in the aircon system, it could still be wet. So the only way to do that is actually to remove the entire dashboard, because some people actually don't remove the dashboard. So you need to service the aircon system. Otherwise, it will cause health issues for you. So there you have it, all the possible items. Of course, I left out the paintwork, the exterior, the tail light, everything, but let's say add it up, actually there are a lot of items to repair in the car. So when you ask for a workshop to give you a quote, estimate on how much to repair for flood-rated cars, they can't give you an estimate because it's just so hard. Because let's say if you repair the engine already, electronics don't work, you repair the electronics, the wiring don't work, but there's so many possibilities. This comes to my final topic or final question. Is it worth it to repair flood-damaged cars? They are saying that around 95% of the cars that are flood damaged do not have insurance, flood coverage or special perils. So most of the cost, or all of these costs, will have to be borne by the owner themselves. So is it worth it to repair the cars? For me, there's no right or wrong answer. Let's say for example, you have a 20,000 ringgit value car and you need a 20,000 ringgit repair bill. What do? So I can't say whether it's right or wrong, because the car might be fully paid off already. So you don't need to buy a new car. So you put a 20k in, you get to drive the car for another, for example, 2 to 3 years more. Or you take the 20,000 and put a down payment for a new car. However, you will be burdened with more loans and you have to suffer the depreciation of the new car itself. So I'll leave it to you guys. There's no right or wrong answer. It's all up to yourself. In conclusion, I think I've given a lot of info and how-to guides in this video itself. I think there'll be too much to digest. But let's say you can't remember all of them, I will give you 2 takeaways that you need to remember in case of flood. So the first one is that never ever start your car, and if you're stuck in the flood, please turn off the engine, because this will try to avoid as much damage as possible when the flood comes. Number 2, save the insurance towing hotline in your phone itself, because what happens is that during the floods, the phone line is down, so you can't actually access the data. So if you can't recall the towing hotline, it's a very messy item and you're stuck there. So they just key in your phone already, so they have always on standby and you can contact the insurance towing hotline at any time. So if any other questions that I haven't answered in this video, please feel free to leave them down below and I'll try to answer to you as best possible. In the meantime, please stay safe, take care, and God bless.